Good morning and welcome in the name of Christ. We are excited that you have joined us for this morning's message. Today we are continuing to work out of the book of Matthew, from Matthew chapter 21 verses 23 through 32. I was sitting in a restaurant with a friend having coffee a few years ago when a couple came in arguing with each other. They had just been to the school and met with the principal, and it was obvious that it had not been a good experience. It seems that their child had gotten himself into some trouble, so they had both taken off work and had gone to the school to get things straightened out. In listening to their comments, sprinkled with an assortment of curse words, I gathered that their son's teacher was stupid, the principal was an idiot, the school should have been closed down years ago. In fact, the only thing at the school that did not seem to be a problem was the behavior of their son. And as I listened to these 30-something parents lambast their school for at least trying to impose some discipline on their son, I thought back to how things were when I grew up. Now, over the years, I have really tried hard not to come across as one of those old grouches that just sit around and complain about the younger generations all the time. But it would seem that parenting styles have changed a little from, well, when I was a kid in school. Well, what about you? How did you grow up? Were your parents strict or permissive? Were you a rebellious child, always testing the boundaries that were set for you? Or were you a compliant child that always did as you were told? Were your parents kind of laid back and just let you do pretty much what you wanted to as long as they knew where you were? Or were they helicopter parents, always hovering around, scared to let you out of their sight or try anything new for fear you might get hurt? When I see what a tight leash some parents have on their children, it makes me a bit sad, especially when I remember my own childhood. I mean, how did people my age and older ever grow up and reach adulthood without a cell phone? And how did my mother keep from having a nervous breakdown without me sending her a text every half hour or so to let her know where I was, what I was doing, and who I was doing it with? I can remember how much I looked forward to Sunday afternoons when I was a kid, because we did not work on Sundays. Sunday afternoon was my time to play with friends and go on adventures. Since I grew up on a farm, there were always chores to do, livestock to feed, crops to plant, crops to harvest, a large garden that had to be weeded as well as vegetables and fruit to pick. There was equipment to repair, fences to mend, yard to mow, etc., etc. But Sunday afternoons were special. After Sunday dinner, I was free. And when I got my first bicycle at age 10, I received the gift of mobility. I would often take off after dinner and head out on my bicycle to a friend's house. And I may not come back until dark. I rode on highways, gravel roads, and in traffic. I did not wear a helmet. Sometimes my bunch of friends would all ride down to the local creek on a hot summer day and we'd go swimming. We had no lifeguard, the water was not chlorinated, and we caught no terrible diseases. And by the way, there were a lot of us that grew up in this same way, and we all made it to adulthood alive and better off for the experience. Another thing I've noticed that has changed quite a lot is parenting styles. I read a while back that a recent poll found that 70% of parents in the U.S. today believe that stressing academic success is not good for children, and that ways need to be found to make the idea of learning more fun. Really? School needs to be fun? Now, nobody told my parents or teachers this. When I was a kid, school was not considered fun, nor did anybody try to make it fun that I remember. School was work, and my parents cared a great deal about my grades. A's were expected, and anything less than a C was completely unacceptable and would bring dire consequences. You see, my parents believed that academic achievement reflected successful parenting, and that if a child was not doing well in school, then there was a problem. And the problem was not with the curriculum, the teacher, the principal, the superintendent, the school, or the weather. The problem was with the child and the amount of effort that the child was putting forth. Parents, what is the best way for getting your child to do as you want them to? As parents, we often give instructions that seem arbitrary or draconian to children. Kids are regularly forced to do tasks that seem ridiculous at the time. Have you ever told your child over their complaints, "Well, someday you will thank me for this when you're older"? For children, rebellion just comes naturally. I know it did for me. It's just a part of growing up. Often our kids obey us simply out of fear of punishment. But yet, we know that the job of every parent is to work themselves out of a job, right? Our job as a parent is to transform a dependent child into an independent, self-sufficient, responsible adult. We all know that at some point, we as parents must allow our children to make their own choices. But we also know that allowing them to do so will inevitably lead to mistakes and bad choices. Again, that is just a necessary part of the maturing process. In our lesson today, Jesus tells a story about parenting as he tries to impress on his listeners the importance of obeying God. Just like earthly parents have hopes and dreams for their children, Jesus' story reveals the same traits of compassion and understanding in our Heavenly Father. Jesus describes the Father whose expectations are clear. Go out and work in the field. The first son rebels and tells his father no, but then later has second thoughts, and after thinking about it, he goes and does what his father asked him to do. The second son, though, is much more calculating. He appears to be an obedient son, but really has no intention of doing what his father has asked of him. When his father asks him to go and work, he appears to obey, but does not, choosing to disobey and doing what he pleases instead. Then Jesus poses the critical question to those listening. Which of the two did the will of his father? Now, if this had been my brother and me, both of us would have been punished, one for talking back and the other for disobeying. But Jesus portrays God as having a forgiving heart that looks at the bigger picture. It's not the first son's words that are important, but his actions. This shows us that God allows room for complaining and resistance to his will. Even though the first son shows outward signs of a rebellious spirit, he eventually comes around and chooses to do as his father asked. But the second son is just talk. He makes promises he has no intention of keeping, and therefore produces nothing of value. Clearly, Jesus is telling this story in front of the temple crowd for the benefit of the chief priests and elders that are questioning his authority. Jesus points out the difference in the two sons to the crowd. Jesus says the tax collectors and the prostitutes are like the first son. They are rebellious, but have since thought better about the choices they have made. They are like the first son because they have acknowledged their errors and have since changed course. They are now headed toward the kingdom, even though they have made mistakes in the past. But like the second son, The scheming, double-talking chief priests and elders are not bound for the kingdom. They say one thing, but do another. The lesson Jesus is teaching here is clear. One cannot simply talk the talk. You must also walk the walk. What you say is important, but what you do is even more important than what you say. And we all know that a person's words are empty unless they are backed up with action. Jesus even shows that God is willing to forgive and forget past mistakes, even when we have been downright rebellious, if we are willing to admit past mistakes and change course to the right path. There are many stories in the scriptures that have people in them just like the first son in Jesus' parable. Many of them eventually turned out to be even great prophets and teachers, even after telling God no. Moses, Jonah, Peter, and Paul all come to mind. Have you ever said no to God? Have you ever felt God nudging you to do something and thought of all kinds of excuses to not do it? You know, things like serving on one of those committees at church that you've been asked to serve on, working on a mission project, visiting a sick neighbor, forgiving someone that you know you should forgive. Fill in the blank yourself here. Remember, when God was nudging you to invite your neighbor to church, when you came home from work, you noticed the car in the driveway and you knew that they were home, but then you got home and saw all the other things that you could be doing instead, not to mention the fact that the Royals or the Chiefs were playing and you wanted to watch the game? Why is it so easy to come up with an excuse to tell God no? And many times we tell God no by saying, not now. Have we ever come to the place when we have said no because we feel that we've done our part, or that now it's someone else's turn to do it? Clearly, the Father did not feel that either son had already done their share. He knew they were capable of doing much more, and so he asked for it. The Father's attitude towards the first son should give comfort to all of us sons and daughters who have not always been the most obedient of children. For all of us who have fallen short, there is a message of welcome and an invitation to change, to step back and think about the choices that we've made and then to try again. Our past blunders will not be counted against us if we are willing to both have a change of heart and a change in our behavior. Remember, there are always people watching us to see if we are a genuine disciple of Jesus Christ, and they make that judgment about us by watching to see if what we say matches what we do. Are we really doing our best to live out our faith? Or are we more like the chief priests Jesus is chastising in this story? Are we sincerely trying to follow Christ to the best of our ability, making the things of God a priority in our lives? Or are we just trying to act like a Christian when we think that someone is watching us? And how can we claim that we are a Christian if we are rarely ever seen attending church and hardly ever give any money to our church? This is an area where we must walk the walk if we are to be believed. The point of Jesus' story is that it's never too late to change how we are living and then to choose the right path. For those of us who have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, there is always a message of welcome and invitation to come and try again. Our God is a loving parent who only wants the best for us. Past blunders will not be counted against us when we follow them up with a change of heart and a change in our behavior. In this way, we demonstrate that we are doing everything we can to faithfully follow Christ, so that we may be salt and light. Amen.